But the red one. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. The minutes have been distributed. Are there any amendments to the minutes? There's a proposed agenda. Any amendments to the agenda? Agenda is placed on the table for discussion. Okay, you're going to go ahead and get started. We're going to start with the Medicaid forecast.
All right. Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Allison Taylor. I'm the Director of the Office of Medicaid Policy and Planning, presenting the April Medicaid forecast today with updates from the December 2022 forecast, joined by Jeremy Palmer on my right. He's a principal actuary at Milliman. On my left, I have Paul Bowling, Chief Financial Officer for the Family Social Services Administration. I have a couple of framing notes to start. For the first time with this forecast, we're seeing finality to two long-standing COVID-19 responses. So first, the federal public health emergency is ending May 11th, 2023. The enhanced federal matching rate associated with that is phasing down starting now. And the federal requirement to maintain Medicaid enrollment during the pandemic was ended by Congress on March 31st, 2023. That means we have started returning to normal Medicaid eligibility review actions. We do have a couple of infrastructure or systemic improvements that I want to feature that will be discussed today. The first, and the purpose of these infrastructure investments, I should say, should help put Medicaid on a sustainable path. First, you'll see an anticipated launch of the Indiana Pathways for Aging program. That is the Managed Long-Term Services and Supports program that's meant to assist with our growing aging population. And second, in partnership with the legislature, we're establishing a predictable and sustainable approach to reviewing provider reimbursement rates for Medicaid services. This is known as the rate matrix. This will assist with workforce challenges facing Medicaid, and we'll feature that also at the end of this presentation. So to start, this is a look at our base forecast. Just a note on what is not in the base forecast. It does not include the rate matrix that I just discussed. That'll be featured later. And it also does not contain any current legislative proposals that would look at HIP rate equalization beyond what we've talked about here together collectively. That's in the base, so proposals up to 90%, that delta would not be in here. We'll give you a visual later, but just wanted to frame that. So what is in the base forecast, the top half is total program expenditures. We have a slide later to reconcile to December, but generally, things to take note of, the first three lines are our current managed care programs, representing approximately half of program expenditures, by far majority of enrollment. That fourth line, Pathways for Aging, that is our new managed care program that supports, as I mentioned, Hoosiers and aging at home. This is exciting because it really brings coordination and alignment in an otherwise really complex space and introduces a single source of accountability. So this program comes online state fiscal year 2025, and you're going to start to see transition of program expenditures moving from fee-for-service into that managed care line. And the bottom half of the exhibit brings in other funding sources that will offset Medicaid costs and estimates what the general fund assistance need will be. There is an increase in funding need for state fiscal year 24. I do want to identify two reasons there. First, certainly the phase out of that 6.2 enhanced FMAP associated with the PHE is a driver there. Over $500 million or half of that increased need is due to lost FMAP. But in addition, I do want to flag that the general fund need over the last several years has been relatively flat. If you go back and look at state fiscal year 19, the appropriation need was $2.24 billion. 23, 2.36. And so, the question, how did that general fund need remain flat despite really historic enrollment level increases? Well, that is because we pay our managed care entities more for additional lives covered. However, those additional lives were low cost, meaning they were healthier, had less service. So we've been taking back funds from the MCEs due to that low-cost experience, and that's been offsetting over the last few years. That trend will dissipate or kind of return to normal when we get, as we move away from the public health emergency response. Setting aside pandemic and increased enrollment, over the last 5 years in terms of programmatic increases or pressures on the program, definitely the top line is the growth in aging population. By 2035, we'll have more aging folks than the number of children in the US. So that's just something we and every other state in the country have to deal with. On the managed care side in recent years, we're seeing higher costs for behavioral health care, especially in children. So those are some of those upward pressures. On the next slide, this is a view of our enrollment projections relating to our return to normal operations after the PHE. So this slide is updated from December, and it shows actually more individuals coming off the program from the December view. This is primarily because we are starting eligibility review processes as soon as possible under federal law, and thus we're seeing some additional disenrollments. After the unwind period, we do see a net reduction of about 400,000 members from the program. This is inclusive of our continuous eligibility protections for children and extension of postpartum eligibility. We have a couple more slides that take you through different views of enrollment. This portion, this looks at impacts by population, just kind of indicating here the largest growth and then reduction is definitely in Healthy Indiana Plan and Hoosier Healthwise. Those are our, childless adults and moms and children. And just flagging LTSS, it is experiencing, LTSS is our aging and supports for those in the community. That population continues to grow. It's just having natural growth, as I mentioned, being our kind of fastest growing population. This is yet another view of enrollment. This view is average monthly projections. And what I want to kind of pause for a second show is the addition of this MLTSS line. So again, we have pathways coming online, July 2024. So that hits, and that's state fiscal year 25. And we can start to see enrollment shifts from fee-for-service into this managed care program, nursing home, waiver folks, and those dually eligible for Medicare and Medicaid aging individuals. This slide compares total expenditures from the April forecast to December. Top line here is that total expenditures are going down for state fiscal year 23, 24, and 25. We're seeing large capitation rate adjustments, and that is due to the offsets that I just mentioned, where we're taking funds back from MCEs for their lower cost experience during the pandemic. We're also seeing impacts on eligibility and disenrollment. So lines 3 and 4 are really about the fact we are starting eligibility actions faster than we had anticipated. So we moved those up a month, given the federal law that passed at the end of the year. So we're having individuals come off the program sooner. So we're seeing additional savings. LTSS, just want to clarify, that is just the aging population. That is not our managed care program. That is just general LTSS growth in the aging population. And then flagging what's new from when we were with you in December, this next close to the bottom, we have an update to our regular match rate. I know y'all are familiar that we have the federal government matches our expenditures. That rate is going down in 2025, and so we're going to be, in effect, we'll have to contribute more. And so if you jump to the next slide, you'll see a view of that where it hits the general fund. So this is a general fund need compared to the December forecast. Again, generally, the theme is adjustments down. Just want to point out a couple of things here that you might notice there's an increase in 24 alone on cap rates. That is largely due to increased costs in behavioral health care treatment in children. You're also going to start to see the impact of the PHE FMAP phase down. So we will see kind of it spread out over 23 and 24 in a way that it didn't look in December. And you can also see that decreased regular FMAP matching rate, see that kind of new contribution, the increase in the state share. So that's flagged here in the 2025 column. So this next slide is a view of approved program changes. You saw these in December. We are adjusting for some experience. The things to point out here are that MLTSS, so this is the Managed Long-Term Services and Supports Program, Indiana Pathways Program. It's new go live. When we were together in December, it would have hit a little earlier. We've moved that to July 2024 to provide a nice long runway for readiness. And so that shifts some of those startup costs for the program back to 25. HIP rate equalization, there's a little adjustment there. When we were together last, we were looking at 82.6% of Medicare being that balancing point. It is now 83.3. We were able to adjust up a little bit, so that's included here. And then do want to be transparent, there is a new item at the bottom, continuous eligibility expansion. That is a new item. It is in the approved program changes line though, because the federal government is requiring all states to do that. We've got to do it by January 1st. There is legislation moving to enable us to do that, but that is a required change. On HIP rate equalization, just wanted to provide a visual for you. This takes a closer look at equalization, and I'll take a step back. I think everyone is very familiar, but just as a reminder, we have a federal mandate that we equalize physician and ancillary service reimbursement rates across our programs. Currently, HIP is set at 100%, other programs at below 80% of Medicare. The baseline forecast presented today, as I mentioned, represents that 83.3 balance, where it's kind of an aggregate budget neutral approach where we're keeping total expenditures whole. But we wanted to make sure you knew that due to timing issues of payments, we wanted to provide a visual of what that looks like in terms of ongoing costs associated with those adjustments. So we have baseline presented here. Ongoing full cost, which will really be fiscal year 26 and beyond, is around 47.6 million. Due to timing issues, we're going to be kind of ticking towards that in 24 and 25, but wanted you to see that full commitment. We also wanted to provide a visualization of 90% because I know that is also something that is being discussed as a policy matter with the legislature. So that is a visual of the 90%. We did have a question come up. I have just 2 quick points on HIP rate equalization in December. Just wanted to clarify, these are provider reimbursement levels. We're not talking about coverage levels or benefits for individuals or members. So just want to make that very clear. And then a quick note on equalizing rates. As we move to this HIP equalization scenario, we are moving to a minimum fee schedule across Medicaid. So that means that the health plans have to pay at least at our baseline rate. So we won't have negotiating below the baseline, which we think will be a significant positive improvement for providers and less administrative abrasion. And then just a couple more slides. Wanted to provide, we're sort of stepping out of items, so this is not in the forecast. HIP equalization, the 83% was. This is not. This is the rate matrix and associated strategic provider investments that we've discussed before. Just a real quick comment on rate matrix. It represents our commitment to providers and our partnership to the legislature to provide predictable and transparent processes for reviewing provider reimbursement rates. So our goal is to develop sound methodology to review and make recommendations to the legislature on appropriate and fair rates for providers. And we want this process to be tied to the biennial budget process. For phase 1 of the rate matrix, we had identified providers that really rely on ad hoc increases and or those that have had really outdated rates. They haven't been adjusted in a very long time. Those are our HCBS providers, dental and NEMT. And this is the slide we presented in December. It represents numbers in the governor's budget. At the time, it was a placeholder. We had not completed our provider engagement work, so we didn't have final rates. So I'm going to jump to the next slide, which represents updated and final proposed strategic investments based on our rate matrix work with these provider groups. Just a couple of points. We did hear from assisted living providers and some legislators that our initial rates for assisted living, that as a result of this process, were not high enough. And so we listened and did adjust those rates upwards. Really important, I just want to flag, in addition, when it comes to rate matrix, you'll see rate indexing towards the bottom. That's important, especially for this phase one group of providers who historically have had that ad hoc nature of rate increases. They've not seen adjustments in years. That combined with recent jump in inflation, and we are looking at really significant investments in the double digits to kind of get them back to where they need to be. So rate indexing going forward should help minimize that, coupled with regular rate reviews. We think that we will keep that nice and consistent and manageable for the budget process. We do provide a link at the bottom, so this rate matrix is posted to our website. We have shared this with stakeholders. If you were to view, and we do encourage you to jump on there and take a look at it, you're gonna see that these providers are certainly our phase one providers. There's also a few other that are included in phase one. They do not require additional strategic investment, so they're not hitting this slide here for you today. And we will be supporting their rates over the next biennium with existing spending that has been built into the forecast. Just one thing to be aware of, when you get on there, you're gonna see one provider service that looks a little different. It's applied behavioral therapy, ABA therapy. It has an E. It's the only one in the matrix that's got an E. That's because ABA therapy does not currently have an established rate. And so we're going through the methodology work right now, and we're including provider engagement to establish a rate, and so we can move away from a current reimbursement approach of paying for the service at percent of billed charges. This results in really a wide range of rates for the same service across the service line. And so really looking forward to getting them on the rate matrix and aligned with the rest of Medicaid services. And then finally, just a quick look at CHIP. The appropriation need here is growing. Again, that theme of as enhanced FMAP phases out, and this slide reflects the updated state fiscal year 2025 FMAP that I mentioned. So again, that little bit of additional contribution need. And with that, I've reached the end of our slides, and I'll pause. Senator Mishler, hand it back to you.
Questions from the committee? Senator Kadora?
Thank you for your presentation. On slide number 12, if you don't mind, so looking specifically at the items that have not been included in the budget forecast, looking at, for example, home health, $79.3 million in fiscal year 2024. The state share is $26 million. So just to confirm that the total at the bottom for all of these total provider investments, the state share is in 2024 is $254 million, and then in 2025 is $339.8 million. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. And I did mean to flag that the total provider investment line, to your point, shows the total share. The bottom line, we are featuring, that's the cost above what was in the budget.
Correct.
Governor's budget. So those are the two lines, but you got it.
So basically, the investment funding increase line item, which is the 132.7 and the 178.5, this is what is above and beyond what you proposed originally in the governor's budget.
Yep.
Great,
Yes.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Mr.
asking
Chair.
that.
Representative Porter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Allison, good morning. The nearly $600 million in Medicaid that we have, how would that be distributed? Are we going to put that in general fund, or what bucket would that move into? The 568, which is almost, okay?
Director Jackson?
Yep, thanks. So Representative Porter, and I'm going to lean on Joe here if I get any of this wrong. So just to clarify, there is money left over from FY22, first of all, to the tune of 188 million. That was that will be reverted as part of closeout this year. The surplus statement that we put out with the governor's budget, with the governor's recommended budget back in January, I think at that point in time, the estimated Medicaid reversion excess, whatever you want to call it, for this fiscal year, it was a 500 number. Yes, somewhere in the 550. We assumed that we would revert 525 of it this year. as part of closeout for '23. And then with this new forecast, the $569 million that's being forecasted excess this year, just to clarify, we won't know exactly what that amount is until probably roughly a quarter after the end of the fiscal year. But we will probably touch base with FSSA and revert a safe amount this year. We've said something like 525 is what we'll revert this year. Just again, kind of what's a safe spot that we're not going to put anybody in a bad position. But yeah, we'll probably revert 525 of the 569 closeout this year. And I'm sorry, that will revert back to the, I mean, it could revert back to the Medicaid reserve account, or it could revert back to the general fund, either way.
Okay, so we're looking at, depends on the day where those dollars will go. If it's back to the general fund to help build our closeout, or goes to the Medicaid reserves, right? So it depends on who depends on who needs to bucket more? Or what?
That might be a way to look. I mean, it will all be part of the.
I'm just trying to keep it
combined
simple for people to understand.
Yeah, it will all be part of the general fund combined reserves. So it just kind of, is it in the checking account or the savings account is kind of the way I think about it. But it'll all be in the general fund reserves.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Just a thought, Zach. So if we have over 300 million in new dollars for increased provider rates that's not in the forecast, why wouldn't we use some of that 500 million to pay down the increase that's outside of the forecast?
Yeah, so I would, and we've done this in a few budgets where we've used some of that excess to buy down some of the Medicaid appropriations for the new years. That works well for the first year. When we do it for the second year, though, that builds in a cliff that we know we're going to have to address once we write that next budget the following time around. And so to the extent we do it, I would just advise let's do it in the first year and not in both years.
Representative Delaney?
Yes, I'm concerned on page 3, it indicates that by May of next year, we'll have a net reduction of 400,000 people under Medicaid. What are we doing to make that transition for them? Are we helping them get on the Affordable Care Act? Are we transitioning to insurance? What are we doing to not leave 400,000 of our citizens medically uninsured or unprotected?
Yeah, great question. So we are doing a lot. So if you, and I'm happy to send you the link, we have a publicly available website on return to normal Medicaid operations. We've been planning for this for 2.5 years. We've activated all of our local networks. We have flyers, we've done text alerts to individuals. The most important thing for this increased enrollment population, we want them to know that when we return to normal eligibility operations, they will need to engage in the normal eligibility redetermination process. So for the last many months, we've been reaching out in any way we can to encourage them to update their name, address, get in the benefits portal, make sure we know how to find you so that when we do send you information about your benefits, you can respond. And so we have an entire sort of engagement and outreach effort partnering with local partners and coalitions, community partners, navigators, all engaged. Our health plans are really great partners because they have additional means and modes of connecting to a majority of the Medicaid members. So they too have been sending text messages and reaching out. And so if you're interested in tracking, we do have all that information, all of the kind of stats where we're at, all of our reports to CMS is available online. I will mention that we were one of only a handful of states in the country not to get a mitigation plan from CMS. So when they took a look at our return to normal operations plan, they said, you've covered all your bases. And so we have been very intentional from a systematic perspective to be ready and to be very thoughtful and provide as much opportunity for members to know what's coming, because that's the most important thing. And so you as legislators, if you have constituencies where you feel like you'd like to communicate this information, myself and Gus Habig would be happy to provide you with information, links, flyers, links to webinars, could even connect, with local community coalitions in your area to provide information, so.
This population can sometimes have difficulty with complying with all these requirements and procedures, and that's been our history, I believe. Are you going to do anything in the way of positive outreach? I mean, phone calls, knocking on doors to get to people who you detect are not coming on the system?
Yeah, so we are activating all of our networks. Again, health plans are making calls. We're partnering with 211. They're armed with information as well. And we're activating Navigator networks and others and making proactive phone calls. And we're monitoring lists of those at risk as well, so.
And what happens to the person who doesn't respond to any of this, doesn't get it, or doesn't respond to it, and then they have an incident? Can they get enrolled, in effect, immediately when they end up in the emergency room or at the doctor's office?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different options. There is presumptive eligibility. So for individuals, if they need that temporary patch, that could be an option. There's a grace period. So if enrollment does lapse and we're in that 90-day window, there's opportunity to come right back in. Again, our health plans are really motivated to keep folks in the program, so they're actively reaching out and engaging. And then again, our community partners really arming all the different touch points where an individual, especially an individual who is not, will have trouble engaging with some of the administrative process that goes with. I mean, we have to, under federal law, do annual redetermination. It is what it is. But our benefits portal and online system has gotten a lot better. Individuals can upload documentation relating to their eligibility, which hadn't been an opportunity in the past. So hopefully, folks, as they return to normal operations, they're going to see some administrative opportunities to engage meaningfully and sort of efficiently. But there's going to be natural attrition. We do expect this 2.2 million is not the new normal. There are many folks on the program now that we will find ineligible because they have other coverage, they've incomed out, they may not even know they're on Medicaid. So we need to get to the point where we have folks that are eligible on the program.
Thank you. I hope we can help the folks who need it. Appreciate it. Bye.
I agree. Yeah, I'd
Thank
love
you.
to partner with you on that.
Senator Melton?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your testimony. On page 12, on the dental line item, is pediatric dental health care included within that? Or is it just more adult?
Yes, I'm going to take a quick look. Yes, I'm getting a nod from our rate. Yes, dental is inclusive of pediatric.
Okay, great, thank you. And going back, and I want to thank Representative Delaney for his question about the 400,000 population. Just to follow up on that, do you have that broken down per county, individuals that will be, that need to be reached out to? And if so, if you can share that with us. I know that we had a forum in my district, and this came up, and I believe someone from your agency spoke about it. But if there is a toolkit for communication
Yes.
that you can share
Yes.
for those agencies.
Okay, wonderful. I heard two things. Let me check on the county breakdown. I imagine that is, let me take that back. And then from a toolkit perspective, yes, we have multiple toolkits. If you see something that isn't hitting the message, what you need, I'd be interested to know, let us know, because
Right.
your counterparts are going to be in
Right.
that same situation, so.
Thank you. And last question might be more for Zach. Zach, what's the current balance in the Medicaid reserve? What's that right now?
I'm going to answer really slowly while I pull it up. Joe says 429.2 at the beginning of this fiscal year? Yep.
Can you say it again?
429.2 million.
All right, thank you.
Yep, and again, that's the one of three savings accounts as part of the general fund.
Right.
Any other questions? All right, thank you. Next, we have Mr. Jackson, the economic forecast. Excuse me.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Uh, Happy to be here this morning. I think today I'd really just like to focus on really any changes to our outlook, for better or for worse, relative to the December outlook and, especially answer any questions you folks have. I think on balance, it's kind of interesting. I think kind of the overall outlook remains similar, really coming out of 2022 into 2023. Things really came out stronger a bit than we were expecting, especially for the first quarter of 2023. So that, really provides kind of a higher base going into the next couple of fiscal years. Certainly consumer spending was a big part of that. Home sales rebounded a bit more than perhaps we were expecting. And as a result, payroll growth, the payroll outlook is better on balance than we were looking at. So, those are some of the positives. One thing that has stood out to me recently, and I know it's been picked up, is, labor force participation has been a big issue really nationally, within the state of Indiana, really labor availability. I think on balance, we're finding that labor force participation has increased a bit more than perhaps we were expecting, especially in that 25 to 54 age range. One thing that's kind of gradually pulling down that participation rate is that it really counts, really everyone 60 and over, and so doesn't truly, kind of account for, who's likely to be in the labor force at any given time. So, that has given the payroll participation rate a bit of a boost, especially when you look at it from that range. There's a few things going on there, really. Immigration into the country. We got some data in late December that indicated that immigration has been higher than we were previously thinking that it was. I think a gradual thing that I've mentioned before is improving access to daycare for children, elder care, that kind of thing, to the extent that frees up, parents, to be able to take on, either employment at all or work, go shift from part-time to full-time. Certainly has been helpful. The expiration of some of the pandemic era support, that combined with inflation may have pushed some people off the sidelines, just, feeling more of a need to, get that income than maybe they felt a few months ago. And, just some improvements in, job matching, whether that's, building skills that you need to get the job you want, shift industries, that kind of thing, potentially moving to where a job is. I won't say too much about home sales. That's a very mixed bag right now. I think that, the main thing I'll say about there is, certainly there are pockets within the country that are really probably hurting right now. Those are mainly areas that really saw some of the hottest growth, over the last 3 years. And so, things have done well in the state of Indiana, but Indiana is still not in that category that did extremely well. That was, a lot of the areas where people were moving, and just the infrastructure couldn't keep up. So, the good news there is that, we see things being fairly stable, within the state of Indiana and more broadly in the Midwest. So, a bit less downside potential there is the main thing that I'll say on that front. Having said that, I think we're kind of remain in a situation where, we are really kind of pushing kind of a full capacity in the economy, especially with inflation. Inflation remains above, where it needs to be and where the Fed, kind of is mandated to keep it. So, we're kind of in a situation where I think the base level going into the next couple of years higher than we were expecting, but then, growth rates over the next couple of years being a bit lower. But again, that's off of a, higher level to begin with. It's a fairly marginal thing. Certainly, the situation with the banking issues recently, Silicon Valley Bank was one, and some, that was kind of the headline, and a few others. Certainly raises some, risks to the forecast. That situation, at least markets seem to be fairly comfortable with where that came out. Seems to have been fairly isolated. We see really, any broader effects of that would be in terms of basically tighter lending standards, which, I think we are seeing, but we certainly don't see a situation where, markets are, seizing up, just locked up, nothing is happening. We don't see a situation like that. And probably the other side of that is that to the extent that lending standards tighten, probably makes the Federal Reserve just, a little less likely to tighten. Maybe they'll pull back a little bit just, to try not to pile on too much to any impacts on lending. So that's a bit of an offsetting factors. And that's very much the story of what we see moving forward is just a story of a lot of offsetting factors that, anything that goes relatively well, makes the Fed a little more likely to tighten. Anything that goes not as well, makes the Fed, a little more likely to take it easy, so to speak. So that's very much, kind of how we see that balance working out. So, I think growth rates slightly lower than we were looking at previously, but again, from a higher level, and again, not anything that we would see raising alarm bells, kind of go quickly. And I don't intend to go through all these slides. A lot of them toward the end are just more for reference, for you folks to take with you. Real GDP growth, 1.4, 1.5, 1.9. GDP growth starting with the ones is generally not what we get excited about, but also not, below zero or anything like that. But it's just kind of where we are right now. A lot of timing just got thrown off with things over the last 2 or 3 years. So, we're just seeing a lot of catching up and basically just normalizing of a lot of industries. Certainly one thing that still sticks out to me is that big drop in residential fixed investment. That's a big factor pulling down that overall GDP growth. Now that's, that can be new home construction, and it's also investment in existing homes. Certainly interest rates, that kind of thing is part of that, but it's also partly just a coming back down of just a massive amount of investment that we saw in 2020, 2021. So it's, again, that's very much just kind of a normalization there. Certainly vehicle sales, I know I mention this every time, certainly a big one for the state of Indiana. One thing that, as we get into a slowing economy, we wouldn't normally expect, and again, I say slowing, not, decreasing, but, we normally would probably expect, a bit of a pullback in vehicle sales, but, we're very much still in a situation of, we see it as trying to rebuild inventories, again, just from what happened over the last 2 or 3 years. So we see that as supportive and just kind of counter-cyclical. So the outlook for Indiana, largely unchanged. We've been dealing with a lot of recent data revisions. Talked with the Revenue Forecasting Committee. We've tried to talk through a lot of those revisions to the data from the Department of Commerce. Payroll employment a bit higher, and that's certainly one of the stories moving forward. In this year, we see payroll growth a bit higher, wage growth still running very high. We see that as being supportive, and largely that just reflects, just a large number of job openings relative to the available labor force, and just, the underlying demand, the underlying economy supporting, employers' willingness to hire people at higher wages. Auto manufacturers, again, still continue to catch up. Home building declined a bit, but still, I'll show in a bit that slide that I always show about, kind of showing relative to where we were 15 years ago and 10 years ago, put things in perspective. Certainly a number of really, really large projects coming in. I won't name those, but certainly some big things in burgeoning industries, providing a lot of positive support. Again, I just certainly won't go through all these numbers. Payroll employment, that 1.4% for 2023, a bit better than what we were looking at. There are slight negatives in 24 and 25. That's kind of where we were before, and really that largely just reflects how close we are to a full employment economy right now. That's just where you are with things. Wage income certainly coming back off the extremely high levels that shouldn't be viewed as anything, any cause for alarm, just kind of where we are, and a very reasonable expectation coming out of that. So just some pulling back there, but I think that's, where we've been with things, and not to harp on this, but so much of it is just kind of really just a normalization after 2 or 3 very odd years. Housing starts down from where they were, but certainly not collapsing, crashing, anything like that. There's still just so much demand for housing out there that we see that continuing to go. This is a slide I'll just stood out to me. I took the quarterly numbers were so all over the place that I moved to annual numbers, but certainly the situation in 2022, to see that combination of payroll growth and the high growth in average annual wages, is certainly an unusual situation. Just shows, again, just strength of the economy, and just kind of a coming back out of where we were over the last 2 or 3 years. And, point that I'll make, that we get, a question we get from various places, and I've made this before, is we're talking annual average wage. That's, kind of a total income, and not a wage rate number there. So, that's hours worked times wage rate. So especially for part-time jobs, if you have someone going from working 10 hours a week to 20 hours a week at a job, even if your wage rate stays the same, that doubles your average annual rate. So that's just, kind of a fairly small point to make there, but I think helps to clarify, especially for certain industry sectors, kind of what's going on and what we expect. I've finally shifted gears on this slide a little bit, and not referring to the level from 3 years ago, and really just talking more about the past year. Probably not surprisingly, kind of given where different industries are now, the leisure and hospitality industry kind of at the top of the heap. And these are not growth rates; these are absolute numbers. So just kind of showing the growth that we've seen in that area, again, just, reflects, more normalization. Healthcare and social services has been a big one, still, with that sector just being in recovery mode, really more the social services area. And as I've pointed out before, that includes daycare, nursing home care, that kind of thing, all gets within that category. So that, is a combination of, the demand has been there, but just, more labor availability, that kind of thing, and just better ability to, keep businesses open. Been a big factor there. Construction, certainly a lot of infrastructure projects going on, a lot of, manufacturing logistics, in addition to the residential, which is, the biggest portion of that. I won't go through the whole list here, but, certainly a lot of strength coming out of the last year moving forward. And again, it's a little bit of a, to some extent, kind of an inversion of what we've been seeing, although transport and warehousing is one that I'll point out that's been strong throughout all of this. Again, I've shown this before. Interesting to see, how the light trucks, and that includes SUVs, really has become such a dominant part of the market. Kind of the main thing to focus on there is just really wanted to put the numbers that we're looking at in a bit more of a historical perspective. Still not to quite to the highs that we saw, back in the late 2010s, but still, relatively strong numbers on that. A little bit of leveling off in market share of light trucks relative to cars, but that's after some really big changes. Again, I still like to throw this out just to, show a little bit of historical perspective kind of on where we are, both in terms of, kind of the home building activity. Also, I do point to that basically the whole decade of the 2010s that, to the extent that inflation is an issue now, shelter costs are a third of the CPI calculation. It accounts for a third of it. So, as I pointed out before, the increase in shelter costs, has some pretty deep roots in terms of the pullback in home building activity that we saw for many years coming out of 2008. So it's just a point that I always like to repeat, just for a little clarification. Bottom line, I think things are very similar. Certainly the risks have changed to some extent. Happy to talk about those risks, go through them. Again, coming into the year a bit stronger than expected. Growth, moving forward, probably a little bit weaker, but not markedly so. Home building, certainly a huge aspect of what we see moving forward, but largely the risks going forward are very similar to what we see at the national level. So I think with that, the rest of the slides really are for your reference, and so that's kind of the main thing that I have to say.
Any questions? Senator Cadoro.
Thank you for your presentation. I know you're just providing the information for us as a body to make, to digest and inform policy. Are there any lessons from other states or any policies or recommendations that we should pay attention to as we get into fiscal year 2024, 2025, assuming that inflation goes down and then we go back to some sense of normalcy? Are there any policies that we need to pay attention to mitigate any, shocks or fluctuation in either, economic, in GDP or unemployment? Because I think as inflation goes down, unemployment in your presentation showed that we need to be back, I think, 4.2 or 4.6, something to that.
Yeah, well, that's a situation where, I think, in order to push down inflation, it's kind of basic, at least as we see it, that unemployment, the Fed tightening, does need to cool. That's the main way for the Fed to try to cool the economy a bit. I don't, I don't have, any specific things, beyond things that you're doing. I know certainly a lot of states are competing in terms of, economic development efforts, for a lot of projects, in terms of just, being business friendly, that kind of thing. But beyond that, there's not too much that I can say. Sorry.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Porter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Jackson, for your presentation. I know in December, we talked about potential for a recession. And it seems like it's getting pushed out more and more. And then on slide 5, it talks about Indiana outlook mostly unchanged, but positive. So do you foresee a recession coming up, or inflation coming up, and recession coming up anyway soon?
No, we really don't. It's kind of similar to, in December in that we don't see a recession, per se, which really is, kind of negative growth. We do have a couple of quarters in there where you potentially get fairly close. So, I think still the message is not necessarily recession, but, to the extent that growth is positive and therefore not a recession, still not what you'd normally get excited about, I think. So,
Follow up. So in regards to inflation, it was last year, about this time, it was 9%. Now it's down to about 5%. And even looking at your charts, what do you think is the specific impact on the Indiana economy, and particularly our growth and where we sit in the middle of
Right.
the Midwest?
Yes. Yeah, in terms of inflation, it is coming down. And we see it at being a gradual process. I think in terms of, the state of Indiana economy, again, one of the big ones with inflation is housing cost, shelter cost. That's a third of it. The thing about shelter costs is that's very slow to move. It's slow to move on the way up, and it's slow to move on the way down. And it's partly just because, as you have rent, and all that, for most folks, if you're on a yearly rent cycle, your rent's going to change gradually. Another point that I'll make on that, I was kind of thinking of it from my own standpoint. One part of that calculation is for folks who are in their own homes. The BLS also includes an estimate of basically what you could get if you rented out your home that you're in. And so, that's a, potential of what, or, a measure of what inflation could be. But, for a lot of homeowners, that's relatively irrelevant if you're not really going anywhere, and you're paying a mortgage, or if your home is paid for, that's showing up in inflation. But in terms of kind of your purchasing power, it doesn't really matter that much. It's a little more of an opportunity cost concept. So to the extent that I'm sorry to answer your question, I think to the extent that housing is an issue, I mean, it's certainly an issue in Indiana. I think it's probably one where, in Indiana, I haven't seen the numbers specifically, but kind of looking at home, kind of follows the narrative for home prices that, certainly higher, will take a bit longer to work that portion of it down. Beyond that, in terms of, say, wages, varies a lot sector by sector. Certainly the, improving labor force participation, so much of the wage income at this point, or, wage pressures, does depend upon labor availability. The more labor availability, will help to pull down, wage pressures. So sorry, that's, there's a lot of different aspects to the inflation story.
Thank you very much. Your final comments are very important in regards to wage pressure.
Okay, good.
Any other questions, comments, Senator Moulton?
Thank you. Just really quick, in the past couple of years, we've seen some issues in the supply chain demand. What's your take on it, where we are now in terms of resources for building homes, automotive? There's been a lot of delay over the past couple of years in regards to the supply chain. Any feedback on that?
Thank you for bringing that up. That's actually something that I could have mentioned right at the beginning. I think, in terms of things that kind of have gone right or, better than we expected, I think some of the supply chain issues still are out there, but have probably gone a bit better than we expected. I think we see pockets, of things, but in terms of things like looking at shipping rates, that kind of thing, I think we really do see a lot of sectors getting caught up. There's still room to go, but we don't see it pulling back, I think, as much as we had seen. Again, that varies sector by sector, but on balance, we see that going a bit better than expected.
Because one of the slides, I see a dip, I believe, in '24 in imports. So I didn't know if you had any, if that was related to that as well, so just curious.
It is. I think, again, that's just, at this point, that's more that just we're kind of caught up, right? That it got so far behind and that pushed, the rate of increase up so much. So much of that was catching up. I think particularly on the retail side is a big one that I think is very much, probably has gotten caught up. I think in terms of kind of inputs, intermediate goods, that's still, still a bit of a work in progress, but definitely an improved situation.
Any other questions? All right, thank you. Oh, Representative Delaney?
Yeah, I've seen some recent, should we call them outrageous bidding wars in which New York outbid Texas for a big project. And I'm wondering, is this likely to continue, and is this likely to impact Indiana when we try to get some of the projects under the legislation passed last year, the CHIPS Act and other acts? Are we likely to find ourselves in a really high-price competition?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, and we're talking incentives of over $1 billion, I'm reading, is that right?
Yeah, there's a lot of them. I can't, every project is different, but yeah, that really doesn't seem to be going away. That's the main thing I can say there.
And we have less than half the population of either New York or Texas. Does that restrain our ability to obtain some of these projects?
Not necessarily. I think certainly, dollar amounts are part of it. But certainly things, depending on the industry, if the industry is a good fit for what your state already has, if you can demonstrate that your workforce is a good match. In many cases, it's just availability of shovel-ready sites. What can you do? There are things beyond,
Right.
Just writing a check, that can help to compete there.
Yeah, I noticed in the last item, I think on your list, the bottom line for Indiana, your last item was that we got to grow in size and skill level for our workforce. Mm-hmm. I assume that depends heavily upon our educational system from K through college. Is that fair?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
money that we invest there is necessary if we're going to have growth.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
That's fair. Okay.
Yeah, that's a
that
fair
seems-
statement. Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate your testimony here.
Any other questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
So next, we'll have the revenue forecast with Krista Ricci and Hari Razafendramanana. I get it?
That's right, yeah. You helped him out? You helped him out?
Okay. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the State Budget Committee. My name is Krista Ricci. I'm the Senior Fiscal Analyst for the Senate Republican Caucus, and I'm joined today by Hari Razafendramanana, Chief Economist of the Tax and Revenue Division at the State Budget Agency. Now that you've seen the economic forecast by Mr. Jackson, Hari and I are here today to present you with an updated State General Fund forecast for state fiscal years 2023, 2024, and 2025. First off, I wanted to give a little background on the revenue process and how the state of Indiana forecasts our revenue. The purpose of the Revenue Technical Committee is to select the statistical equations that are used to forecast state general fund collections for each tax type. Once the equations are selected, the economic variables are provided by S&P Global Market Intelligence, who you just heard from, are plugged into the equations in order to predict state general fund revenues for this state fiscal year and the upcoming biennium. This forecast process is collaborative and has worked very well for the state of Indiana for many years. Most importantly, this is considered a consensus forecast, which means that each of the members of the Revenue Technical Committee all agree that this forecast is our very best effort at projecting state general fund revenues. The Revenue Technical Committee is a 6-member bipartisan committee that contains members of both the legislative and executive branches of government, much like the Budget Committee membership itself. Besides Hari and me, the members of the committee include Susan Preble, fiscal analyst for the Senate Democrats, Eric Gonzalez, fiscal analyst for the House Republicans, Ben Tooley, fiscal analyst for the House Democrats. Sorry about that. Eric Gonzalez, fiscal analyst for the House Democrats, Ben Tooley, fiscal analyst for the House Republicans, Dr. Dagny Falk from Ball State, who's the committee's independent economist. The committee also has support from Hari's team at the State Budget Agency, as well as the nonpartisan Legislative Services Agency. Many of these individuals are here today, and all of their assistance is critical to this process. I would like to take a moment to thank each of the individuals here for their that helped for their contributions and expertise. They work very hard to ensure that the state of Indiana has the best and most accurate forecast possible. I would also like to take a moment to thank each of the State Budget Committee members for their continued support of the committee's independent and nonpartisan process by which the state forecasts state general fund tax revenues. Next, I wanted to give a quick overview of the major revenue sources performance year to date through the month of March for state fiscal year 2023. As you can see, sales and income tax revenue collections are trending ahead of the December 2022 forecast and the same period for fiscal 2022. Corporate income tax revenue collections are trending above December 2022 forecast and below the same period in fiscal 2022. Finally, state general fund revenues year-to-date are 2% above the December 2022 forecast and 4.9% above the same period in fiscal 2022. Within this forecast, there are several economic factors that we need to consider as outlined in this slide. Mr. Jackson touched on many of these, and these are the broad economic trends that are driving the outcomes and overall direction of the state's forecast. This slide summarizes each of the major revenue models and variables within those models to achieve the forecast for the largest 3 general fund sources. For sales tax, we have 2 equations, one for the gasoline use tax and another for the remaining sales and use tax. Individual income tax, we look at separate equations for withholdings and estimated payments. And for the corporate individual income tax, we have one equation forecasting corporate adjusted gross income. And once again, this slide represents all of the variables used in each equation. The committee selects the equations. However, the economic data that's ultimately used within those equations to forecast state revenues are provided by S&P Global Market Intelligence. And then please note that none of these models changed. All of the variables are the same as the December 2022 forecast. This slide contains the major tax policy changes incorporated into the forecast. The revenue models themselves forecast the tax base for each tax type. And then after the tax base is forecast, the actual amount of revenue is adjusted for legislative changes made to tax rates, tax distributions, to the general fund, and other policy changes made by the General Assembly. The out-of-model tax policy changes incorporated into the forecast include the ongoing FIT rate reduction, the gasoline use tax distribution change through which state general fund portion continues to decline until it's 0% in fiscal 2025 and each state fiscal year thereafter. The sales tax from remote sellers, the individual income tax rate reductions passed during the 2022 regular session, as well as timing impacts from Senate Bill 2 from this current 2023 legislative session, which includes when payments are made in 2023 and refunds are claimed in 2024, which overall is estimated to be a net zero fiscal impact to the state. This slide highlights some of the additional out-of-model adjustments that were needed to incorporate revenues that are not captured within the model equations themselves or historical data sets. These include the repeal of the utility receipts tax beginning July 1 of 2022, gaming dynamics including sports wagering, which started in fiscal 2020, and a 20% adjustment for marketplace facilitators legislation and Wayfair Supreme Court decision. The committee wanted to highlight a couple of economic trends within salaries and wages that are driving this forecast. For example, Indiana wages and salaries are projected by S&P Global Market Intelligence to increase in 2023, 2024, and 2025. In terms of the Indiana wages and salary growth rate over prior year, the growth in 2023 is estimated to be lower than it was in 2022, but both years are estimated to grow over the prior year, and growth in 2024 as well as 2025 is estimated to see year-over-year growth in line with more historic levels. And then the prior year S&P 500 index of common stocks, which is a variable in both the individual and corporate income tax models, has been increased pretty significantly compared to the December 2022 forecast data, as demonstrated by the orange line as compared to the blue line. So now, the moment everyone's been waiting for, I'm going to go over all of the major revenues by type. For sales tax, 2023 is estimated to grow $539.6 million or 5.4% over 2022, and the April 2023 forecast is adding $47.6 million or 0.5% compared to the December 2022 forecast. The forecast is adding $183.3 million or 1.7% in fiscal 24, and $17.2 million or 0.2% in fiscal 25 compared to the December 2022 forecast. For individual income tax, April 2023 forecast is adding $129.6 million or 1.7% compared to the December 2022 forecast. The forecast is adding $156.9 million or 2% in fiscal 2024 and $292.9 million or 3.7% in 2025 compared to the December 2022 forecast. And for corporate income tax, the April 2023 forecast is adding $65.3 million or 5.8% compared to the December 2022 forecast. The forecast is adding $176.6 million or 14.9% in fiscal 2024 and $204.5 million or 17.4 million in fiscal 25 compared to the December 2022 forecast. For gaming taxes, the April 2023 forecast is adding $17.4 million or 3.7% compared to the December 2022 forecast, and adding $800,000 or 0.2% in fiscal 24, and remains unchanged in fiscal 2025 compared to the December 22 forecast. For all other taxes and revenues, the April 2023 forecast is adding $126.6 million or 11.1% compared to the December 22 forecast, and adding $60.7 million or 4.8% in fiscal 24 and $26 million or 2.1% in 25. So in total, general fund tax collections for fiscal 2023 in the April 2023 forecast is adding $386.4 million or 1.9% more than the December 2022 forecast. For fiscal 2024, the April 2023 forecast is adding $578.5 million or 2.7% more than the December 2022 forecast. And for fiscal 2025, the April forecast is adding $540.4 million or 2.5% more. And then here's the chart that everyone's used to seeing that has the compilation of all of the numbers that I just went through. For our viewing public and people here in the audience, all of these documents are or will be available on the Budget Agency website. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Hari and I are happy to answer any questions you may have.
Questions from the committee? Chair sees none. So thank you very much for your presentation. We're going to take about a 10 to 15-minute recess. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. I think we have a member from each caucus. Next on the agenda is the Next Level Fund semi-annual report. So I see the treasurer and your crew, so whenever you're ready.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. We're here to present an update on the Indiana Next Level Fund. I have Aaron Gillum and David Watkins here, who are key parts of this team and have been making sure that this fund's been running well the last number of years. So they are the experts, and I'm going to turn time over first to David and then to Aaron.
Thank you, Treasurer. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is David Watkins. I'm the Senior Vice President of Entrepreneurship and Small Business at the IEDC. I'm certainly excited to be here with Treasurer Elliott and Aaron Gillum from 50 South to provide an update on the latest impact of the Next Level Fund on Indiana's entrepreneurial ecosystem. The leadership of the General Assembly and the investment that was made into the Next Level Fund are directly responsible for the growth of available capital to Indiana's startups by bringing in new VC dollars into Indiana and supporting the creation of new funds here as well, all while delivering a significant return on the state's investment and a really compelling internal rate of return. The Next Level Fund is a key part of IEDC's entrepreneurship strategy to support capital access for entrepreneurs and small businesses. As you will see today, the strategy is working. It should be no surprise to the members of this committee that the 2021 and 2022 reflect all-time highs in venture capital dollars being invested in Indiana. But perhaps more importantly, in 2022, more Hoosier entrepreneurs were able to access venture capital than ever before. So with that, I'm happy to turn it over to Aaron Gillum from 50 South Capital, the program administrator for the Next Level Fund.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Treasurer. All right. If you'll allow me, I just have a few update slides just to provide a high-level update of the Indiana Next Level Fund, and then, of course, happy to answer any questions. Just as a reminder, I'm a Senior Vice President with 50 South Capital, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of Northern Trust Bank. We were created in 2000 as an alternative investment group, managing about $13.5 billion assets under management. We invest in venture capital firms, buyout firms, private credit, and secondaries all around the world. Closer to home, we also manage similar programs to the Indiana Next Level Fund in states like North Dakota and the state of Illinois. The purpose of the Indiana Next Level Fund was really threefold. Obviously, there was other factors, but the first was to deliver, competitive returns on behalf of the treasurer and the state of Indiana. The second was making investments that would drive economic activity, investing in firms that would then go out and invest in startup companies, companies that needed scale-up dollars to grow their business throughout the state of Indiana, as well as being a good community partner, fostering a strong and vibrant ecosystem for Indiana businesses. At the highest level, I just want to highlight a few numbers. Just, I know your day is full of numbers, so I wanted to keep this clean. So to date, since inception, we have invested in 25 fund managers. We have made 4 direct co-investments. That means the Indiana Next Level Fund has invested directly into 4 businesses. Our fund managers have gone out and invested in 87 Indiana companies out of a total portfolio of 448 companies, so providing a diversified portfolio. The overall Next Level Fund program was a $251 million program. To date, our managers have invested in those 87 companies over $258 million, meaning they have already achieved one of the primary milestones of the Indiana Next Level Fund. And per our calculations, still calculating for end of the year, but those companies have created over 1,500 net new Indiana jobs. This page provides an overview summary of the overall portfolio of the Next Level Fund. I'll just take a moment and just draw a couple numbers out for your reference. So as I mentioned, $251 million program is what we started with. To date, we have committed $197.4 million, meaning we've actually made commitments to our venture fund managers just under $200 million. That's about 78.6% committed of the total fund. So still about 20% more to go. The managers that we've committed to so far, 56% of them are based here in the state of Indiana. So these are homegrown managers or managers that we've created based throughout the state. What's really interesting, and a number that I'll call out that doesn't always make sense to those who aren't in the industry, but just over 53.6% of our fund has been called. That means we still have about just over 45% of the fund that still needs to be invested. So we've already achieved our goal of investing in companies in the state of Indiana, but there's still a lot of value from our managers who are still investing today. That's great news for the fund. That's great news for you all in measuring success of the program. The last thing I'll call out is the bottom row. Of the 25 fund commitments that we've made, 50 South sits on 16 what we call LP advisory board seats or LPAC seats. That gives us a lot of insight into how these firms operate and always being able to share with them what companies are doing in Indiana in areas that we'd love to see them focus on. From a performance and benchmark standpoint on slide 6, so you can see where the fund sat as of end of the year 2021 and where it sits at the end of Q3 2022. I'll draw your attention to the middle. A couple of numbers here that are interesting. Distributed capital is a percent of called capital. We have already started to return capital to the state, meaning our investments have already started to generate profitable returns, approximately 12 going on 13 million since inception. When you look at our fund in terms of performance on a net IRR and TVPI standpoint, which stands for total value paid in, our funds are currently sitting at 1.23x, which means for every dollar we've invested, that dollar is now worth $1.23, generating just over a 14% net IRR after all expenses. When you look at that based on fund to funds globally, you could see that we're lagging a bit, but those fund to funds also don't have geographic mandates. They're not focused on the state of Indiana or anything like that. So really proud of how our fund is performing thus far, especially when you consider the alternative investments where the money may have been spent. Always like to bring logos just to come out of the numbers for a bit, but this page represents our fund managers. You might recognize a few of these firms around town. Some of them you may not recognize, but all of them are actively looking and investing in companies around the state, as well as in the bottom right, the 4 direct co-investments that I mentioned earlier in Inari, Authentics, MBX Biosciences, and Lessonly. Another way to break out our investment activity, on the far left are the Indiana firms that we have backed that existed before the Next Level Fund program. In the middle column, we have also been able to attract out-of-state venture fund managers that have an interest in investing in companies in the state of Indiana. One example would be Fraser Healthcare Partners, a life science fund that led the Series A and participated heavily in the $115 million Series B investment for MBX Biosciences based in Indianapolis and Bloomington this past year. And then on the far right is the category that I'm personally most proud of. These are firms that we have helped to create since the Next Level Fund became possible 5 years ago. Graham Allen Partners, based in South Bend, Techstars, their sports accelerator here in Indy, leveraging all of our sports resources in the city. 68 Capital, another new fund that was created just about 2 years ago here in Indianapolis. Boomerang Ventures, which has offices in Indianapolis and Fort Wayne, focused around health tech. Early stage health tech investing, and then Render Capital, also a new venture fund based in southern Indiana, right on the border in Clarksville. On slide 9, you can just see just representative of some of the companies broken out by sector. So you can see the diversification that our portfolio brings, software as a service, and then in the middle column, food and ag tech, health tech, life sciences, and then on the far right, consumer companies. So very diversified portfolio, but all centered around technology startups. On slide 10, another interesting way to break this apart, looking at the geographic dispersion on the right side of our fund managers, and then on the left side of the companies they have invested in. So broken out by northern Indiana, central, as well as southern Indiana. So you can see that there is activity now throughout the state, which is something I think we should all be proud of. And I mentioned a few minutes ago that we have had exits. We have had distributions that we've been able to return some capital. This is just a slide representative of just a few companies, Indiana companies, who've actually grown and had successful exits over the past couple of years. Lessonly is an employee software training company, which was acquired by Seismic in late 2021. Still have over 200 employees here in Indianapolis and continue to grow, as well as Socio, another company acquired by Cisco. These are just representative companies in our portfolio that have helped us generate strong returns, as well as scaling up Indiana companies. I mentioned early on in the presentation that one of our, I think our third goal was to be a good community partner. I won't go through this list of events, but I did want to make clear to the members of the board here that, we continue to be very active in the ecosystem, finding partners throughout the state of Indiana, from the universities to the regional partnerships that we've developed, working with them to support and grow the venture and the entrepreneurial ecosystem throughout the state. Since our last update in June, I thought it would be worthwhile to just throw in a few pictures from our Next Level Fund Summit that we held in Indianapolis at the end of August of last year. Governor Holcomb was one of our guest speakers, as well as several of our fund managers came to speak, as well as some of their startup companies. So that was a great event, about 200 people at the center in Indianapolis. This next slide, the next couple of slides, I think, really start to bring it into focus in terms of what we are doing here and kind of the impact that we've had on the state. When we launched the program in early 2018, you could see where our venture investment dollars were about $257 million, about 95 deals were being done around the state. You can see how those numbers have grown tremendously over the last few years. 2021 was a record-breaking year on many levels around the country. So Indiana, got its fair share, but the fact that we had almost $1.3 billion invested in venture capital investments around the state and our companies, I think is a tremendous testament to what's going on. And even though 2022 might look like a lagging year, you can see the number of new companies, the number of deals that were invested in still on record pace, I think, which shows the resilience and the strength of the entrepreneurial community here. This last page is just a summary. If you walk away with anything, I'd just like you to just know that from an investment standpoint, our goal was to invest the whole $251 million into Indiana companies. We have achieved that goal as of today. Our firms are still investing, so from here on out, we're just going to run up the score, which is great news for us, great news for our managers, while continuing to deliver strong financial returns, as I mentioned, over 14% on a net IRR basis, backing some of the best firms in the state of Indiana, while continuing to create new firms focused on subsectors and different geographic regions in the state. All while driving economic activity. And I also know that one of the questions that came up from our last session here was around equity and inclusion. Just looking at our managers to date, I can proudly say that over 26% of the committed capital has been committed to women, minority, and veteran-owned fund managers. These are managers who are investing in companies throughout the state of Indiana, startups, scale-up companies, on a great growth trajectory. So I'd like to believe that, we're delivering the results that we promised, working with the Treasurer's Office and working with the IEDC. We have a great partnership. And they've helped tremendously in terms of making sure if there's any barriers or walls that we're able to break down and continue to move the state forward. So with that said, happy to open it up to any questions that the board might have.
Representative Porter.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your presentation. With your DE&I, you said 27%?
26%, but yes, yeah.
Okay, is there a list available of those companies that you can provide me with?
Of the companies or of the funds that we've invested in, I can definitely provide that to you, yes.
Minority-owned companies?
We invest in the funds, yes, and I can provide that to you.
Okay.
Yes.
And when can we expect that?
I'll say by the end of the week, but yes. I'll say by the end of the week, but as soon as possible.
Okay, could you please send it to the chair also?
Sure.
Mr. Chairman, will you accept that information?
Yes.
Thank you. And he get it out to all of us. We'll be inclusive. Thank you.
Any other? Yeah.
Could I just, actually, the information should probably go to the budget agency, so they have a better way of distributing to all of us than I do. So,
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I just want to make sure that you are on that list.
oh, okay, thank you. Appreciate you looking out for me. Senator Mountain.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your testimony. Nice to see you, Mr. Treasurer. I'm not going to take too much time. I'm still learning more about the next level, so I'll just going to keep my questions kind of general. Out of the $251 million you mentioned, 78% has been committed. One of the main return on investments that I've seen in the presentation is 1,500 jobs. I'm trying to wrap my mind around the ROI from a fiscal perspective back to the state. And I might have missed it. I haven't seen a direct fiscal impact in overall investments. Is that something that is can be communicated?
Are you speaking, Senator, to the job impact or to the actual financial return? Both. Okay, so I think actually if you go here, this slide speaks to the financial return. So what Aaron highlighted, third row from the bottom is
what slide is that?
Slide 6.
Third row from the bottom on this chart actually shows the net internal rate of return for the underlying funds. So that would be kind of the internal rate of return that we're tracking on the funds at the moment.
Okay. How do we compare to other states that you've done this in? Is that on par?
It is, yeah. I like to show this not necessarily against other states because that's not necessarily the way to track this. We do show this to be transparent. Cambridge Associates tracks similar fund of funds around the world. Right. So I know that I'm putting us up against some of the best firms in the world when I show this information, but I like to do this in that we are actually doing pretty well considering our geographic mandate here.
What's thank you for that. What's the average administrative cost for fund managers that have you mentioned in the presentation?
The cost to manage the
yes.
next level fund, it's approximately 1% of the committed capital, $251 million.
Okay. As far as from a geographic perspective, I know I've seen, and this kind of ties into what Representative Porter was mentioning. Mm-hmm. I've seen the logos in the map, kind of light in the northwest quadrant of the state. Any opportunities in Northwest Indiana that's either looming or prospects?
Yeah, no, that's totally a fair question. The reason I wanted to show this map, I'm sorry. Okay, the reason I'll call out specifically northwest corner. So, for example, in the blue logo, Myers-Glaros is based in Maryville, Indiana. Firms like Orthos, Respiratory Health Technologies, Paragon are near South Bend, Elkhart area. Traction AG is based near Auburn, so northeast Indiana now. But just to give you an idea of where some of these companies are in northern Indiana.
Got it.
When you're asking about other opportunities, though, I'm actually interested in this too, and working with some of the partners, specifically like Purdue Northwest or something like that, attending their startup competitions. We've actually followed them very closely, made introductions to several of our fund managers here. What's interesting about the region is there is a lot of opportunity. There are a lot of creative resources there. Interestingly, while they can also tap maybe what's going on in Chicago, I think having this program and having fund managers here in the state that they can connect to who have an inherited interest in investing in companies in the state presents, I think, a better opportunity to drive growth in the future. And you'll see more logos, I think, in the future. Yeah.
I would just make the comment, Senator, that the pipeline is extremely strong of pre-seed and seed stage startups coming out of Northwest Indiana that we're seeing. My team was just up in Hammond at Purdue Northwest for the Innovate Within High School Pitch Competition on Monday. And one of the high school teams that pitched had already pitched actually to a Chicago VC. And so as those startups mature and become ripe for private sector venture capital investment supported by the Next Level Fund, I think we'll see more companies in Northwest Indiana in short order.
I love it off records kind of get together and learn more about the initiatives and programs. So I won't take too much time. So thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Chair sees none. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Next, we're going to start with the agency projects. Department of Corrections, Kevin Orn.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. The project that we have for your consideration this morning is the asbestos remediation of 3 buildings at the Westville Correctional Facility. The 3 buildings have come to the end of their useful life. Where the removal of the asbestos is part of the pre-demolition process. This involves 3 buildings and 2 underground connecting tunnels. Pretty straightforward project.
Questions? All right. Thank you. Next is Dan Hugie, IFA.
Thank you, sir. Members committee. I think budget agent did a very good job of explaining the appropriation request here. Back in the 2015 session, there were appropriations made of $6 million a year for 2 years for the Westlake project, which is from Hammond down to Dyer. In the 2017 session, that appropriation continued for the Westlake project. It's $6 million a year for 2 years. The double track project also received $6 million for 1 part of the biennium budget. So you see $18 million for 2017. 2019, both projects received $12 million of appropriations to be used to cash fund or pay-go the 2 rail projects up in Northwest Indiana, the Westlake Extension, which is from Hammond to Dyer, as I mentioned, or the double track project, which will double track the South Shore from Michigan City to the end of the line. The state, during the last legislative session, also approved $231 million of ARPA funds. We have almost spent almost all those ARPA funds. Our goal was to spend the ARPA dollars first because there's a deadline to spend those. We have almost spent all of those. This is the next available state cash we can utilize to move the project forward. I did bring Mike Nolan from South Shore. I can never say Nick D the right way. So South Shore, in case there are any questions about the project, but that's the request that's in front of the board today.
Questions? Senator Melton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your testimony. Just really quick, I was hoping Mike can share with the potential of Senate Bill 434 passing and the additional revenue, what's NICD's plans to seek additional dollars to help with the platform in the downtown Gary? So just want to make sure the public as well as our colleagues know.
Having an established local share for that project will enable us to start the engineering and environmental parts of the work so that we can then be in a position to go after federal funding the feds, when you come to them, are going to want to see a shovel-ready project, and they want to know what's your local source of match. So this is a tremendous opportunity for us to really re-envision the Gary Metro Station.
Thank you.
Anyone else? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Steve McAvoy, NDOT.
Morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. NDOT has two projects on the agenda today. First project is related to the construction of the Mishawaka Unit and Assault Building. In December of '22, we requested $7.1 million for the construction of the unit. On March 22nd, the bids were received. We had 3 bids. Low bid was $10 million and some change. We had a $12.7 million and a $12.9 million dollar bid. So we're requesting an additional $2,945,227 in order to be able to fund the construction of this facilities. And I would say when the project is complete, we will close the existing Mishawaka unit and the South Bend winter site and relocate to this new site. Those sites will be sold.
Questions?
Chairman.
Representative Porter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Chairman asked probably about a year ago, how many more SALT buildings do we have to build and renovate? I mean, at this point, if we keep waiting, the next one will be 12 million, then it'll be 14 million. So how many more do we have to do?
So we have like 110 in the state. We have many. We can build one a year. So we've probably got 60 left.
I won't be around.
I mean,
Thank
either.
you.
I know it's redundant when I come here, I know, but it's a great need for NDOT to be able to provide safe facilities. So
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
thank you. Be
Any other
glad to
questions?
supply the list.
I think I ask that quite often. So thanks for asking. Any other questions? All right, thank you.
Okay, our last project is the architectural and engineering fees for the renovation of the Bluffton subdistrict. We had an original Budget Committee approved amount of $210,000 earlier in 2020. We're requesting an additional fee amount of $170,400 for a total fee of $380,400. We had decided to add some additional square footage to the building, including enlarging the parts room, lengthening some garage bays so we can fully service trucks and tow plows under roof, and renovating the administrative area of the facility. So all in all, with the additional fee, we're still just under 4% for architectural and engineering fee, which is very reasonable in the construction industry. Questions?
Questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Next, we have the university projects. We have Purdue University, Alicia Kopsinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. So today's project in front of you is a renovation of our mechanical engineering building on the Purdue West Lafayette campus. This is a 41,000 gross square foot project totaling $25 million to be paid for using gift funds. We'll be renovating the ground floor, first floor, second and third floors of the mechanical engineering building. Improved instructional spaces, which are inclusive of labs and classrooms, will be relocated to the ground and first floors with new collaborative space for students nearby. A new elevator will be installed to increase access, and then a new stairway will connect the mechanical engineering building to our Gatewood addition. Mechanical, electrical, and plumbing systems will be upgraded. Two pieces of this project that contribute to the higher dollar per gross square foot and assigned square foot is the addition of that elevator. And then glass windows and a storefront are going to be added to areas on the ground floor. So this project builds upon the College of Engineering master plan to accommodate enrollment growth through the renovation of multiple facilities over time. This renovation is in alignment with the university's space administration strategies, and it will result in increased space efficiency with flexibility while also accommodating more students per assigned square foot within the existing building footprint. With that, I am happy to answer any questions.
Questions? All right, thank you. Next is IU, Dr. Tom Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Budget Committee. On behalf of Indiana University, we have one project for you today on our Indianapolis campus. This is the renovation of 3 floors of the nursing building. This is in order to renovate for space related to new skills labs and simulation labs. Simulation labs are very important in the instruction of nursing. IU is in the middle of a plan to double the size of enrollment in the School of Nursing on the Indianapolis campus, and so this project desperately needed to accommodate that growth. $7.7 million and $5.2 million of that are being funded by gift funds, and the remainder by operating reserves, primarily for the purchase of simulation equipment. Be glad to answer any questions.
Questions? Representative Porter.
Thank you, Dr. Morrison. A question is, having a new facility is great, but do you have the faculty to teach if you're going to double the size of the nursing program? Is there a transition there?
There's a concurrent growth plan going on within the School of Nursing to also increase the size of the faculty, and that is also being funded by gift funds.
Thank you, Dr. Morrison.
Any more questions? All right, thank you. And next we have, I believe, review items with FSSA, Allison Taylor.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. Allison Taylor, back to present 4 state plan and waiver amendment review items. I will just get those started. The first one relates to school-based services. This is a state plan amendment. Just want to recognize Representative Carrickoffer's partnership in this. But this state plan amendment essentially kind of aligns us with House Enrolled Act 1405 from 21 and 1192 from 2002, and allows Indiana Medicaid to reimburse for school-based services pursuant to the Medicaid, the Students Educational Program, or other requirements under Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA. This amendment also clarifies that the Department of Education licensed school psychologists are qualified providers to provide psychologist services within their scope. And you can see the fiscal impact. This is in partnership with Department of Education, and so schools will put up the state match for this state plan amendment.
Questions?
All right, so our next state plan amendment relates to comprehensive rehabilitative management needs facilities. These we call CRMNFs. And this too is sort of an alignment effort, which will, this captures our intent to increase their reimbursement by 10%. We did some increases for the other group homes, but because CRMNFs have a different reimbursement structure, the avenue to get there is through a state plan amendment here today. So that is what this amendment does.
Questions? All right.
Okay. The next state plan amendment relates to structured family caregiving. And so currently, structured family caregiving payments are tax exempt in a couple of our programs, HIP and Hoosier HealthWise. Due to some timing issues, we were prepared to do this for the rest of our population, particularly that ABD and Medicare savings, but COVID hit, and so we've been a little bit delayed. And so this state plan amendment would get us on that policy level of having structured family caregiver payments being tax exempt across our programs.
Questions? All right.
Okay. Our last state plan amendment relates to out-of-state children's hospital services. And so what we're doing here is really just extending the policy that we kind of established through the legislature in the last few years, increasing reimbursement for out-of-state children's hospitals. So we're putting in a methodology through 2025, and that requires us to amend our contract with CMS. So that's why we have this before you.
Questions? All right.
Okay.
All right, thank you. All right, that's all we have. So are there any motions to remove items from the agenda? Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
Second, Mr. Chair.
Can we take that by consent? All right, so that's all we have for today, so we'll go ahead and adjourn. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, do you have any updates for our next meeting? Right, our next meeting. 60 days out. Okay.